Greetings, my name's David Bell. I'm speaking to you from the University of Otago in New Zealand. The theme, titled Chaos, Kawaii and Cultural Memory, examines the common phenomenon of developing contemporary arts from the practices, sensibilities and themes of the past. I'm going to focus in particular on contemporary arts from Japanese contexts, but within or catering to the needs of international audiences. Chaos drives the work of Masami Teraoka. He confronts contemporary moral issues with subversive intent to critique themes of displacement and alienation in the modern world, responsibility and consequence, the rewards and costs of freedom and desire. In this example, he represents a geisha's desperate fear of the disease of AIDS. She recognises a former customer who's died of AIDS, who's come to visit her. The writing in the background here tells us their conversation. The geisha, "Oh my God, it's you that came back." Skeleton, "Yes, it's me again. I took a subway to get here. I felt bad on the train because everyone was afraid of me." The outsider or alien status of prostitutes, voyeurs, punks informs Teraoka's art here and in his first AIDS painting, American Kabuki Oishiwa. Teraoka draws here on conventional formats, iconographies, themes and sensibilities of the past. He embraces media formats from earlier eras. Here the fourfold byobu screen, dating right back to medieval times. And here and across the whole pictorial field, the pictorial conventions of ukiyo-e, floating world picture woodblock prints. Here, for example, he uses cartouche formats for titles, for signatures, for subheadings. Here he uses fields of floating text, common in illustrated block printed books and in single sheet prints. He adopts the linear vitality and clarity of ukiyo-e prints and the unstable dynamics of asymmetric compositions. And in particular, throughout his works, he adopts the frozen mie poses of kabuki actors, or in others, the languid sensuality of the courtesan. In particular, he draws on the theatrical dynamics of the artist Utagawa Kunisada. And the intent here is to transpose the hedonism of kabuki and brothel themes of Japan's floating world culture into modern world equivalents, most notably in his early works in Venice Beach in California. The decadent character of mid-19th century Edo, today's Tokyo, becomes a metaphor for the decay in the modern world. Teraoka's preoccupations with death, disease and morbidity echo parallel themes in late Utagawa art. Edo celebration of the present moment emphasises the ephemeral quality of life and echoes early Buddhist understandings of ukiyo as this floating, sorrowful world. These works carry more than a tinge of a sensibility of mono no aware, the pathos, the resigned or detached melancholy that's become a recurrent theme in Japanese aesthetic sensibility. Throughout these works, Teraoka also maintains the iconographies of past traditions. Here, the clouds and mists that acted as the vehicles of the supernatural. Here, the dark, foreboding mist in the back of American Kabuki, and over here, the misty swathe surrounding the skeletal form of the former customer as he emerges from the side of the field. These ambiguities generate useful device for distinguishing the real from the imaginary or the dream. And traditionally, ghostly apparitions are associated with clouds and dreams. Indeed, until the early 17th century, dreams were the principal medium for encountering ghosts. Japan hosts a broad range of ghostly and supernatural phenomena. Yurei, hazy or faint spirits. Yokai, bewitching things. Obake, transforming things. Tengu, goblins, or oni, demons. Yurei were especially scary. Essentially the reikon, or spirit of tormented souls of the dead, often female ghosts who suffered harm in life, returning to seek revenge on those who caused their suffering. The malignant and dangerous yurei owes its power to frighten to Shinto beliefs regarding death and disfigurement. Here, in American Kabuki, Teraoka draws specifically on the ghost O-Iwa, a famous yurei with a disfigured, bruised eye. O-Iwa, the character, originates in Kabuki theatre in a play presented first in 1825 called Tokaidao Yotsuya Kaidan, written by the playwright Tsuruya Namboku. It's an intensely violent and frightening dramatic narrative of love, lust, betrayal, and murderous revenge. The unfaithful Iemon Yotsuya murders his father-in-law and then poisons his wife O-Iwa. The slow, tortured death destroys her beauty and leaves her with a distorted face and darkly blackened eyes. The despair and rage that results from this fuel her vendetta after the end of her life against her husband and his lover and his relatives. Throughout this work, Teraoka adopts the conventional iconographies for O-Iwa. The disfigured face, particularly the blue blackened eyes, the long dishevelled hair that tell his audiences of her emotional chaos and disturbance. These floating shinka, or balls of spirit flame, the dark and foreboding, threatening, stormy sky. And the autumn moon since Heian times has had poetic associations with sorrow, pathos and melancholia. He also adopts the motif of water. Water is a recurrent image for Teraoka. He refers himself to the waters of desire, the dark waters of sexual union. In doing so, makes an oblique reference to the Edo floating world, its brothel culture, and today's Mitsu Shobai, the water trade, the underworld that embraces the sex industry within current Tokyo. Beneath the figure of O-Iwa here, he actually literally adopts the motif of Hokusai's very famous print, The Great Wave, to represent the destructive, overwhelming force of the deluge against the fragile human presence above. These psychological portraits were the stuff of kabuki and ukiyo-e dramatic characters. They reach back to deeper sources in Japanese literary histories. Ghosts occur in literature as early as the possessing spirit of Lady Rokujo in the first novel, Genji Monogatari. The dark passions of American kabuki also provoke a sense of the dark, mysterious depths of Yugen, of Heian period origins. O-Iwa was not an accidental choice of subject for this work. She establishes a direct link to the epidemic, to the plague of Teraoka's HIV theme. Namboku had originally based his character O-Iwa on a true story of a woman called Iwa, a 17th century woman disfigured by smallpox and then betrayed by her husband. The focus on once beautiful woman is also not a coincidence. Historically, women were identified with mujo, impermanence and defilement. Japanese appreciate impermanence as what Donald Keane described as a necessary condition of beauty. In the 10th century, mujo was indicated by metaphors of seasonal change and inconstancy in love. By the 12th century, the spirit of mujo had become crystallized into the widespread belief of mapo. Mapo was the Buddhist notion of a final age of degeneracy, a time of lawlessness and eventual cataclysm. For Teraoka, the plague of AIDS is tangible evidence of mapo today. AIDS represent the poisonous forces of darkness in his works. Condoms, the flimsy attempt at protection. They both recur in Teraoka's art as motifs for an apocalyptic vision of the inevitable consequences of moral chaos and abandoned indulgence in our desires. The apocalyptic vision of mapo underpins also the popular arts of Takashi Murakami. Murakami received his traditional training in neo-traditional Japanese-style Nihonga, ink painting. He subsequently melded this with otaku fan culture and toy culture in a fusion that drew on and challenged traditional Japanese art practices. Murakami works between fine art and commercial worlds. His production company, Kaikai Kiki, destroys distinctions between consumer capitalism and fine art. Art is capitalism and artworks are consumables. Murakami's Superflat project embraces popular culture into high art to critique shallow two-dimensionality in Japanese cultural consumerism. The apparent light-heartedness of his themes is underpinned by a darker sense of catastrophic or malevolent force. He acknowledges the persistent undercurrents of immorality and instability in contemporary society and juxtaposes these themes and the stability or the apparent stability of contemporary Japan against the horror of the dropping of the atomic bombs. Little boy over Hiroshima and fat man 9 days later in Nagasaki. His character, Mr. Dobb, is an identity that Murakami applies repeatedly in a range of guises. Mr. Dobb seems cute. His Mickey Mouse ears and his bright and shining eyes seem playful and humorous. But the rictus-like grin that typically features on his face betrays a more malignant character. In some compositions, Mr. Dobb turns into a ghostly spectre or a crazy, chaotic, crazed, monstrous figure. In his most recent major exhibition in Qatar, exhibition entitled Murakami Ego, Mr. Dobb is represented as most malevolent and destructive. That malevolence is accentuated in his juxtaposition within that exhibition against Murakami's prefabricated, delicate and innocent-looking mushroom people, seen in the background in the larger painting being eaten and devoured by Mr. Dobb. Murakami makes explicit links in these themes to the darker side of earlier Buddhist imaki, or scroll paintings. In particular, he looks at sources in late 12th century Buddhist paintings that convey the concept that the crimes committed in this life cause people to be reborn into one of the realms of suffering, to suffer the same punishment over and over for eternity. Scrolls like this one, the Jigoku-e, or the Hell Scrolls, together with the Scrolls of the Extermination of Evil, or the Scrolls of the Hungry Ghost, portray images of the hells of excrement, in this case, searing thirst, pus and blood, the river of blood, or the iron mortar. Each corresponds to a specific sin, gluttony, violence, and so forth. Again, in the Qatar exhibition, these themes inform large, giant mural paintings that surround the entire display. There's an irony in these works. Arhat refers quite specifically to an entity called a perfected one, someone who's attained nirvana. But here, he's represented these figures in the demonic guise of the Hell Scrolls. Murakami's translations here are quite literal in character. The characters themselves are literally transposed from their medieval origins into contemporary guise. Murakami's Superflat project continues to acknowledge Japanese undercurrents of anger, a hopeless sense of resignation, and feelings of inability to express their feelings about their past. Mappo and Mr. Dobb retain their relevance today. Ubiquitous image in Japanese culture today is Hello Kitty. Kitty-chan, Miss Kitty, was developed in 1974 by Sanrio Corporation, a company specialising in character design. She was devised as a consumer product aimed specifically at young girls. She gained immense popularity and, coincidentally, over time has amassed billion-dollar sales. She's distinguished by her extremely blank features, the lack of a mouth, the very short, inexpressive limbs. Traditionally, that's been seen as laying Miss Kitty open to the superimposition of her own feelings and attitudes. But coincidentally, these features render her mute. Her unemotional impassivity conveys values of conformity, cuteness, and introverted reticence as feminine virtues for young women today. The cute culture she represents is called Kawaii in Japan. It's an aesthetic sensibility. It means likeable, endearing, non-threatening. These implicitly feminine sensibilities, and the sense of refined playfulness that revolves around themes like Hello Kitty, are conventional themes in Japanese culture. They find classical precedent in sensibilities of the Fujiwara court during the Heian era. They are represented in the cultivation in the Heian period, the medieval period, in Heian Kyo, today's Kyoto, in the cultivation of feminine tastes and feminine sensibilities. And these were realised in the development of an aesthetic of miyabi, or courtly elegance and refinement. The elegance of miyabi was tempered by the sensibility we mentioned earlier on mono no aware, the sensitivity to the pathos of things. Together these things came to inform what Ivan Morris called a cult of beauty, in which artistic sensibility was more highly valued than ethical goodness. Interestingly, Kitty has her origins in those early 12th century scroll paintings of Genji Monogatari, the Tale of Genji. This image represents one of the late chapters in the second half of Genji Monogatari, after Genji's death, which deals with his successors and their romantic and loving exploits. The figure or the characteristics of Kitty find their origins in these pure white, almost expressionless and almost bare and detailless faces, white, impassive, featureless expressions. Like Kitty, these allowed contemporary viewers in Heian Kyo to develop their own imaginative appreciations of the attitudes and feelings of the characters. The suggestion in this particular image is one of great tenderness, as the loving prince soothes his lover with gentle music. But contemporary audiences would have recognised here, in the wind blowing through the autumn flowering grass in the garden outside and blowing the curtains aside over to the right, the chill wind of discord. The prince is indeed playing the biwa, the lute instrument seen here, to calm the figure behind him, a figure called Nakano Kimi. But indeed, he's doing so for a reason. She's angry at him. She's discovered he's been making love to someone else. Indeed, it's been her half-sister, Ukifune. The anonymity, or the lack of expression in the figures, lays the image open to ambiguities that inform also the contemporary arts of Hello Kitty. Kawaii cute is kitsch. Kitty-chan indeed draws her roots in this Heian culture, but she shares little of its elegant understatement. If anything, she's high kitsch. She does, however, maintain Heian period sensibilities of impassive reticence and charm. Here, however, the shallow immaturity and apparent innocence of Kitty-chan replaces detachment. Takashi Murakami acknowledges the comfortable, happy character of Kitty, but, as he notes, she reflects a world nearly devoid of discriminatory impulses, a place for people unable to comprehend the moral coordinates of right and wrong as anything other than a rebus for I feel good. The phenomenon is significant. It reflects traditions of drawing on the cultural materials and examples of the past as they inform learning in the arts and as they can sustain cultural memory, not just in Japan, but in East Asian arts in general. In particular, it reflects practices of learning by building on conventional practice. These are evident in the monastic context of the Hell Scrolls and in the Edo studios of the woodblock designers like Utagawa Kunisada. They're evident and inform Murakami's own university learning and in the way he runs and operates Kaikai Kiki. All are sustained through practices of learning from example. Drawing on earlier conventions and sensibilities informs the authority and legitimacy of new art for contemporary, everyday aesthetic engagements. It doesn't simply reproduce conventional forms, it reconstitutes them in new hybrid modes to reconstruct for new contexts. Sustaining cultural memory in these ways, Japanese sensibilities, or Yamato Gokoro, become vehicles for sustaining deeper strands of the Japanese cultural consciousness. The dystopian visions of Teraoka and Murakami maintain the disruptive force of Mapo. Kitty-chan's impassivity maintains Buddhist detachment and that hint of melancholy. And in all cases, those issues from the past inform the effectiveness of these works in the present. Artworks act as a conduit for the maintenance of rich cultural memories. They provide sites of pictorial and poetic associations through which cultural memories can be sustained. Aleida Aßmann describes this amalgam of culturally charged iconographic, somatic, and thematic loci as a media of memory that can maintain the aesthetic tastes and sensibilities of collective, social, and cultural memory through which individuals and social communities can mediate between the aesthetic engagements of their own times and those of the past. It's not a contrived process. Aßmann likens it to Proust's memoir involontaire, involuntary visitations of memory. Haruo Shirane refers more poetically to an elusive traces of dreams, and Joshua Mostow to pictures of the heart. Teraoka's ghosts, Murakami's apocalypse, and Kitty-chan's impassivity plumb the veins that give life and cultural relations their sense of order, reason, and legitimacy. In an age that challenges the values, beliefs, or tenets of earlier spiritualities, habits, and codes, or simply forgets them, their metaphors reveal, revive, and sustain values still significant for maintaining stable, sense-rich habits and appreciations for making sense of our imaginative worlds. Thank you.